Okay, thank you very much. There's no need for me to introduce myself. Maybe just to begin by thanking the Center for Human Rights for giving me the opportunity to come and present on the African Committee of Experts on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. I always say I'm a baby of the center because I did my master's from the Center for Human Rights, and Prof. Francis, one of the gurus who taught me about the African human rights systems, and here I am today talking about the African Committee of Experts on the Rights of the Child. So I'm very grateful to the Center for Human Rights for extending the invitation. So today I'm going to talk about the African Children's Committee, with the main focus on how the civil society organizations can engage with the African Children's Committee. So maybe as a matter of interest, I would like to know if we are aware that there is such a body that monitors the implementation of the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child in Africa. We are aware. Okay, some are aware, some are not aware. So my sister can also testify here. I was in a workshop in Cape Town and everyone seemed shocked to hear about the African Children's Committee, which means there's a lot that needs to be done from our part and also from your part as civil society organizations to enhance the visibility of the African Children's Committee. So in terms of the structure of my presentation, first of all, I'm going to give an overview of the African Children's Committee so that you can have an idea of the composition of the committee as well as the mandate of the committee. And then I'm also going to talk about observer status. And then I will also talk about the state reporting procedures, the individual complaints, the special mechanisms, and then also other potential entry points for CSOs to collaborate with the African Children's Committee. Of establishment and composition of the African Children's Committee. It's composed of 11 members who are independent experts, and it is also important to note that the committee was established in 2001, and the secretariat of the committee is based in Maseru. I'm sure some knew that we were based in Addis, but then the committee recently relocated to Maseru, and then there's a secretariat of the committee whose main duty is to support the committee. This involves technical and logistical support. And then further, the committee also prepares documents such as statements, reports, petitions on behalf of the committee. So when we talk about the mandate of the committee, next slide please. So I can say that the committee has a promotional and a protection mandate, and this is in terms of Article 42 of the African Children's Charter. And then, so some of the things that the committee does, for instance, there is the collection and documentation of information on the situation of children's rights in Africa. For example, the committee conducts studies just to assess the situation of children's rights. For example, the committee has commissioned a number of studies. For example, there is a study on children affected by armed conflict, and there's also a study on children on the move. And then on that aspect, the committee also conducts fact-finding missions just to assess the situation on the ground in various countries. And then also the committee formulates and lays down principles and rules aimed at protecting the rights and welfare of the child. And this can be done, for example, through guidelines. If you check the website, you know that the committee has developed guidelines for child participation, and recently there is a guiding note or guidelines of the safe return to schools by children during or after the COVID-19 pandemic. And then also the committee has a mandate to cooperate with African and international regional institutions and organizations concerned with the promotion and protection of the rights of the child. So you see that I highlighted that in red because that is where the collaboration with civil society organization comes in. So the committee actually has a mandate to collaborate and work with various CSOs in the promotion and protection of children's rights in the continent. And then also the committee monitors the implementation of the African Children's Charter, and this is done, for example, through state reporting, which I'm going to elaborate on later. And then there's also the issue of country visits. And then lastly, the committee also interprets the provisions of the Charter. As you are aware, the African Children's Charter might just say every child has a right to education, but then for some member states, it might not be clear as to how or what measures to be taken to ensure the implementation of that right. So the committee also interprets the provisions of the Charter, and this is done through the development of general comments. So there are a number of general comments that have been developed so far. For example, we have a general comment on general measures of implementation. We have a general comment that was developed jointly with the African Commission on Ending Child Marriages, and currently we have a pending general comment on female genital mutilation. Okay, so I'm going to move on to observer status. So just like the other AU bodies, the committee also grants observer status to non-governmental organizations that are working on the area of children's rights. So I'm not going to talk or elaborate more about the criteria because the committee has actually developed guidelines or a criteria for granting observer status, and this can actually be accessed on our website. But basically, for organizations that are interested in having observer status with the committee, they have to write an application which is addressed to the Secretariat of the committee, that's the one that is in Lesotho, and stating the intention, and this should be done at least 3 months before the session of the committee. And maybe for your information, the committee actually has, it holds ordinary sessions twice a year. So these applications have to be submitted at least 3 months before the sessions to enable the committee to go through the documents, the application, and then consider whether the organization concerned should be granted observer status or not during the ordinary sessions. Next slide, please. So I would say maybe the rights and duties of organizations with observer status, or the benefits of applying for observer status with the committee. First of all, if an organization has observer status with the committee, the organization can be invited to attend the sessions and make oral or written statements on issues of particular concern. So as we are approaching this, the session, our upcoming session will be from the 23rd of November. We actually have a slot where all our organizations with observer status come before the committee. They highlight what has been happening in the continent in the area of children's rights, and also even offer recommendations to the committee on what can be done in order to address maybe some of the challenges that are being faced in the area of children's rights. And then also they participate in the proceedings and may request to have issues of particular interest to for them to be included in the provisional agenda of the committee. And then they also have access to non-confidential documents of the committee. And then what is expected from organizations with observer status, they're expected to submit activity reports to the committee on the activities that they have been implementing on the ground to ensure the promotion and protection of children's rights. And in that regard, the committee has also developed guidelines to guide the civil society organizations on how they can actually compile the reports. And the guidelines talk about the form and even the content as to what should be included in those reports. And then lastly, organizations with observer status, they establish close relations and cooperation with the committee and to engage in regular consultations with it on all matters of common interest. So if you can note, most of the work that the committee has been doing, it's a result of its collaboration with organizations with observer status. Some of the general comments that have been developed, some of the studies that have been commissioned, it was actually at the request of organizations with observer status. So I would say it will be advisable for organizations to apply for observer status with the committee so that we can enhance collaboration and ensure that we work together in promoting the rights of the child. So far, the committee only has 34 organizations that have been granted observer status. So moving on to state reporting, this is in terms of Article 43 of the African Children's Charter, which places an obligation or a requirement on state parties to the African Children's Charter to submit reports on how they've been giving effect to the provisions of the African Children's Charter. And if we note, this state party reporting is actually an integral and important part of the mechanism for monitoring the implementation or the compliance with international and regional human rights treaties. we know that there are 55 member states. There is no way we can say the committee will go to each and every country physically. So this state party reporting procedure actually helps the committee to monitor, to assess where certain countries are in terms of implementing the provisions of the African Children's Charter. So in terms of the requirements, the states have to submit a report within 2 years of entry into force of the Charter, and then thereafter every 3 years, and those are what we call periodic reports. And then in terms of the reports, they should contain sufficient information on the implementation of the African Children's Charter, as well as the challenges that are faced, because highlighting the challenges will actually help the committee in coming up with concrete recommendations to the state party concerned. And then after consideration of the state party reports during the committee session, we issue what we call concluding observations and recommendations. This is where the committee will be highlighting that, okay, we have noted that the country is doing this and that to ensure the protection of children's rights, but these are the challenges faced. What are the recommendations for the state party concerned? And then we do not stop there after issuing concluding observations. We then go on to conduct what we call follow-up missions on the implementation of those concluding observations. And then in that regard, the committee has also developed guidelines for reporting for states so that they can be aware of how they can actually structure their reports that are submitted to the committee. So I would say we've noted progress when it comes to state party reporting, and out of the 55 member states, or out of the 50 that have ratified the African Children's Charter, we only have 13 state parties that have not yet submitted initial reports at all to the African Children's Committee. And notable, I'll say, South Africa has submitted an initial report, and this year we also received the periodic report from the government of South Africa. So that is notable, and I believe that is also the work of the CSOs that have been advocating for such. And then moving on to complementary reports. So it's not like the government is the one that has to report on the situation of children's rights on the ground. Also, CSOs come in. And, you know, we always laugh because the government would come and say, we are doing this, we are doing a lot, there are no child rights violations. And then when the CSO report comes in, it's the total opposite. So it's as if there is always a clash and opposition, but we always advise that the state party should report on the successes and the challenges, and also the CSOs have to also acknowledge that the state party concerned is also doing something to ensure the protection of children. So CSOs, it's actually a way CSOs are collaborating with the committee through this complementary reports procedure. And the aims of the complementary reports, I won't mention all of them, but is to provide the committee with additional specific, credible, and objective information that corroborates or actually provides alternative information to complement the report that has been submitted by the state party. And then it also provides the committee with the complete status of children and implementation of the African Children's Charter in the country involved. And then also complementary reports are actually considered before the consideration of the state party report. And in this upcoming session, we're actually considering a complementary report from South Africa. So that is notable. And we actually encourage CSOs to work together, because I think recently they were talking about a situation whereby there's this group of CSOs compiling a complementary report, and then this other group. So it's always good for CSOs to come together so that they can submit one comprehensive report on the situation of children's rights on the ground. And then in that regard as well, for more information, for detailed information, the website actually has guidelines for CSOs complementary reports. In those guidelines, that's where you're going to see how the CSOs should structure the report, and also what information should be contained in the report in order to assist the committee. Next slide. And then also we have what we call the individual's complaints, or what we call the communications procedure, where CSOs or anyone can actually submit a complaint or a communication on alleged violations of the African Children's Charter. And this is in terms of Article 44 of the African Children's Charter, as well as the committee's revised communication guidelines. So in terms of who has access It's any individual, any state party to the African Children's Charter, international or non-governmental organizations. And the communication should actually contain the name and the address of the author and must be treated in confidence. Next slide, please. So in terms of jurisdiction, I think it's also important for individuals or CSOs to be aware of the jurisdiction of the committee. This is in terms of Section 1, Subsection 4 of the Revised Communication Guidelines. So the committee's jurisdiction is determined by the child's age at the time of the alleged violation. So I know there are instances whereby maybe the violation would have occurred when the child was 16, and then by the time the communication reaches the committee, the child is 19. And some people might say, no, this person is no longer a child, the person is an adult. That's a wrong position. The committee actually has jurisdiction as long as the alleged violation occurred when the child was, when the person or the complainant was a child. Next slide, please. So in terms of individual complaints, again, we also have provisional measures, and as highlighted, this depends on the gravity and urgency of the situation. Maybe out of interest, I would like to know, maybe if some of you have concrete examples, maybe just come up with your own case in your mind to say, this is actually a case that would warrant the granting of provisional measures. Remember, it should be a very grave situation and it should be urgent, and then you also have to consider the irreparable nature and imminence of the harm in question. So just to engage with you, can you just give me examples of situations where you say the committee should grant or issue provisional measures? Yes, I'll start with Sabelo.
Okay, sure. The issue of the gapping of the children, I think that's an issue that definitely the committee has to have a look at. I was going to raise it later, but now that you posed the scenario, we can ask, because for me, the so-called vaccination of children is a definite violation of the rights of the children, and the danger and the imminence of the harm occasioned thereby is irreversible. I was going to ask what the committee is doing about it, but you posed it. So that for me is what the committee must be attending to as a matter of urgency right across the continent.
Okay, yes.
No, I just want clarity. So for you to submit the complaint to the committee, must the matter have been heard in the South African jurisdiction, like the courts and stuff?
Yes, yes. So my next slide, the other slide will actually talk about those requirements that is applicability of the community. Yes.
Another thing is that you should consider is albinism vis-a-vis the rights of the children. Not to mention countries, but I watched a documentary where children are actually being abducted, mutilated, killed for their body parts, and I think, I should take into cognizance this, and it should be one of your number one priorities, to be honest.
Okay, thank you. So maybe just for clarity, the provisional measures I'm talking about here is whereby there's a communication, a complaint that has been submitted to the committee to say, we have this case against the government, we have done this, the Constitutional Court has not even helped us, now we are coming to the committee and we are saying this issue is very grave and there is a matter of urgency and the committee should actually grant provisional measures. So that is what I'm talking about. I'm also noting what is happening because this is also what we do, especially when it comes to studies and fighting the issue of albinism. We have not looked at the issue of vaccinations, but I've noted it. Yes.
So are you telling me no one has come to you with such a complaint?
On albinism?
Yes.
So I'm talking about communications. We haven't received any communications on albinism. But the committee, I'll highlight later that we have been doing some work specifically on the rights of children with albinism. Yes. So in terms of provisional measures, an example, the committee has dealt with a case involving the government of Sudan, and this involved two complainants that were actually sentenced to death, and they were imprisoned, and they were waiting with adult convicts on a death row. So when the complainants submitted the communication, they also requested the committee to grant provisional measures, and this was granted, and I think we are going to also deliberate on the communication during the upcoming session. So this is one example whereby the committee has actually granted provisional measures. That is in situations where it's very urgent and there is a likelihood of irreparable harm on the child consent. And the next slide, please. And then back to your question, I think also Prof had mentioned that it's not like you just wake up and say, we have this case against the government of South Africa. There are requirements or conditions that have to be met for a communication or a complaint to be declared admissible before the committee. And this is in terms of the revised communication guidelines. So there are actually 6 conditions that have to be met for a communication or a complaint to be declared admissible before the committee. First of all, it should be compatible with the provisions of the Constitutive Act of the AU and also with the African Children's Charter. Put simply, the complaint should involve alleged violations of the African Children's Charter for it to be declared admissible. And then secondly, the communication should not be exclusively based on information circulated by the media. Which means that if a CS or an individual submitting a communication to the committee, it should not just be based on rumors or news reports. They should actually bring forth concrete evidence on what has been happening on the ground with regards to that particular issue. And then third, the communication does not raise matters pending settlement or previously settled by another international body. This is, of course, to avoid conflicting decisions. There's no way one can go to the African court and then tomorrow they just go to the African, to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and then they also come to the African Children's Committee. So they should indicate that the matter is actually not pending before any other body. And then this has been highlighted, the communication should be submitted after having exhausted all the available and accessible local remedies, which means before one comes to the committee, you also have to explore the remedies that are on the ground. Of course, there are exceptions to those cases. For example, if the procedure at national level is unduly prolonged, maybe it's been 7 years and nothing has been done, then this can be a justification for the committee to say, okay, there is an exception to this rule. And also maybe in situations where you can say there are no local remedies available. And then also we have the issue of reasonable period. Although the committee has, I would say, it's not like there's a certain period that has been written down to say a communication should be submitted after this time, but we are also lenient when it comes to communications. But CSOs have to ensure that the communications are submitted within a reasonable time after the exhaustion of local remedies. And then lastly, the communication should not contain any disparaging or insulting language. So in terms of admissibility, so far the committee has 5 communications that were declared inadmissible, and one of them involves South Africa. And then also 5 communications that are actually pending on admissibility. And then the next slide, please. And then also under the communication procedure on the individual complaints, we also have what we call amicable settlements, or some of us would say out-of-court settlements. So the committee also, in terms of the revised rules of procedure, can actually, at its own initiative or at the request of the parties concerned, guided by the best interest of the child, actually reach an amicable settlement with the state party consent. And then when the amicable settlement is reached, there is a report that is adopted, giving a brief statement of the facts of the communications, the issues identified in terms of the settlement to be reached, and then the report is transmitted to the parties concerned for their signature. And then this amicable settlement is actually done before the committee considers the communication on merit. So first of all, I spoke about admissibility. So if the committee is convinced that this communication or the complaint has satisfied all the requirements for admissibility, then we go on to deliberate on the merits. But if it's declared inadmissible, that's it. So, but then before going to deliberate on the merits of the issue, if there is a possibility or if it's in the best interest of the child, an amicable settlement can actually be reached between the parties. And one good example would be the issue of IHRDA versus Malawi and the Project Expedite Justice versus Sudan, sorry. Okay, yeah, there are 2 cases, sorry. So there's a communication against Malawi and one against Sudan, where an amicable settlement has actually been reached. reached. With the Malawi case, it concerned the provisions of the constitution. The applicants were highlighting that the provisions on the definition of the child is not in line with the definition that is provided in the African Children's Charter. So we did not consider that on merits. An amicable settlement was reached, and notably, during the last session, the parties actually reported that the government of Malawi has actually done something to ensure that the provisions of the constitution are aligned with the provisions of the African Children's Charter. And then next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And then after that, after admissibility, of course, we consider the merits of the communication. And then so far, the committee has 7 decisions on merits, and then we also have 3 decisions that are pending on merits. And then also one thing I didn't also mention, the committee, of course, civil society organizations that are interested, they can actually make an application for amicus curiae so that they can also add their voice on, you know, a particular complaint that has been submitted to the committee. Next slide, please. And then in terms of remedies, the committee issues recommendations to the state party concerned. For example, the country can be advised to maybe amend a specific law that is not in line with the provisions of the African Children's Charter. There's also the issue of compensation. I know the committee has issued compensation in a rape case against Cameroon. And then in terms of merits, so in case that the committee has found a country to be in violation of the articles of the Charter, the certain country involved should actually report to the committee on the measures that have been taken to implement the decision of the committee. And then after that, the committee also follows up on implementations of the decisions. So I know some people may attack, you know, the committee or other AU bodies to say, no, but you're not doing this, but you're not doing that. But maybe it's important for me to highlight that the committee does not just decide to go to a particular country. If there's a decision that, okay, we want to go to Sudan to follow up on the implementation of this decision, we have to involve the government of Sudan. And if they don't give us permission, we cannot go. So those are actually some of the challenges that are being faced by the committee when it comes to monitoring the implementation of decisions. But also, implementation can also be done by other channels. For example, the issue of implementation hearings. And then, next slide, please. So the committee also has what we call special mechanisms, and I think it's also another area where CSOs can actually engage with the committee. So for our special mechanism, for example, as I highlighted, we have 11 experts, 11 committee members. May you move to the next slide so that I can. So all our 11 members have been, I can say they are thematic or country rapporteurs. You can move to the next slide, please. So we have identified thematic areas that we think they are of particular interest or concern when it comes to the issue of children. So you cannot, all the committee members have their various thematic areas they are working on. For example, we have a special rapporteur on children in conflict with the law, right to education, children on the move, violence against children, child participation. I highlighted Honorable Mushira Katab because she is the country rapporteur for South Africa, so we always encourage civil society organizations to engage with these special rapporteurs. And even all of the thematic areas, if your organization, for example, is working on violence against children, if there are any initiatives that are being undertaken, it's always good to involve the committee and also engage with those committee members. And then under our special mechanisms as well, we have established working groups. Next slide, please. So the working groups were established taking into consideration the challenges in some specific thematic areas and the need to take a systematic approach to address these challenges. So notably, we have a working group on children's, the rights of children with disabilities. And they've been working on the issue of children with albinism. A few months ago, there was a fact-finding mission that was conducted in Malawi to assess the situation of children with albinism in Africa. So this is one of the initiatives that are being undertaken by the committee to ensure that all children with disabilities, including albinism, also have access to their rights. My brother, they mentioned something about business. We have a working group on children's rights and business, and I'm also responsible for coordinating the activities of that working group. So if there is a civil society organization working on that particular issue, it's also a good opportunity to partner with the committee's working group on children rights and business. And then we also have a working group on children's rights and climate change. And then we also have a working group on implementation of decisions. Because as we have noted that most state parties are not implementing the recommendations, be it decisions. So we also established a working group on implementation of decisions so that at least they can try to assess the situation on the ground. What are the challenges that are being faced by the countries involved in implementing the decisions? And there is also an ongoing study on implementation of decisions in the continent. And then to the last slide. So other areas of or entry points. So the committee also undertakes a number of activities. We have the Day of the African Child, which is commemorated every year. So it's also advisable for civil society organizations, even if it's not in collaboration with the committee. You can also mobilize or facilitate events in South Africa on the selected theme for that commemoration. And then we also have capacity building workshops. The last slide, please. We also have capacity building workshops for CSOs, and in some instances, we also collaborate with CSOs so that they can also empower the other citizens or even children on the rights and welfare of the child. And then we also have ordinary sessions. I highlighted ordinary sessions everyone can attend. Of course, we have closed sessions and public sessions, so civil societies can actually participate in the ordinary sessions of the committee. So in brief, that is what I would say about the committee. For further information, I highlighted our website, all the documents, guidelines for the consideration of communications, everything is there on the website. And then whoever wants to engage with the committee should get in touch with we have the secretariat, as I highlighted, we have an officer in charge. So all communications are addressed to the secretariat, and then it's going to be transmitted to the responsible committee member. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions? Any other?
In one of your opening slides, there was a sentence to the effect that there are 11 members who serve in their personal capacities. Please explain the personal capacity aspect of that particular slide. And then the state parties reports, are they accessible on your website to the public? And the complementary reports from civil society organizations, is that just for the accredited observer organizations to send, or is it open to anyone to interact with you in as far as the complementarity of the report? Thank you.
Michael?
Yes, I've got an interest in the submission of amicus interventions. Right? The fact that the committee does not post that are submitted on its website. How exactly do civil society get to know what the complaints are about so that they can decide whether or not they actually want to submit it? Because essentially you just have the name of the case listed and the country and the information. There is no content that you know what the case is about, what is the alleged violation that the applicants are making, and therefore it makes them almost illusory that the process exists, but there's no real way of actually accessing it. Has the committee actually ever received an amicus brief that leads to how does the applicant get to know what the case is about to be able to determine whether or not they are?
Thank you. Do we have any other questions?
I think mine must be like a comment, really. Or maybe I missed the point where we're talking about the African Children Committee and rights and issues. I needed to hear something about the children born of refugees and IDPs and whether there is that provision for them or unaccounted.
Okay. Yeah. Hello. Thanks so much much for your very insightful presentation. Mine is a bit of a maybe more political lens on some of the things, or the work of the committee. Some of the human rights bodies have some threats, and let me say regional human rights bodies have had some threats to their independence or their functioning in terms of the work that they do. I'm just curious whether the committee has any threats that it has experienced politically to its workings. I know that's quite a broad question, but thank you.
Thank you. Maybe we'll take a first round of questions and then we'll move to a second one if anyone has more questions.
Okay, thank you. So regarding the first question on the members of the committee, I don't know how, but it's on their personal capacity. So they actually submit applications to say this person is interested in serving as a committee member. So in terms of the African Children's Charter, it just says this person should be of high moral standing, integrity, impartiality. So I don't know how to best explain it, but it's in your personal capacity. Or maybe just to say I cannot say I want to be a committee member because I'm already involved with the African Children's Committee. So I would say personal capacity in the sense that there is no conflict of interest between them. Maybe yes.
But just to add to that, I think it's an interesting and a good question. I would add to that, and what you say is absolutely correct. But it tries also to emphasize not a governmental appointee. In other words, personal in the sense that you're an expert. You could have said expert rather than personal. You are there in your expert capacity, not because you are nominated you're put forward by your government. So it's kind of a little bit there is some government influence. But once you are sitting there, you swear the oath to apply your mind independently as an expert and not because you are South African or you advance the country's agenda.
And then the second one on complementary reports, it's not only for organizations with observer status. So like I said, that there are organizations that can actually come up together to point CSOs, including some that don't have observer status. So it's actually open to every civil society organization working on the issue of children's rights. And then Mike also raised a very important issue of the amicus curiae, because we always say we treat these documents with confidentiality. So it's actually good that you raised that. So what I can say is, for instance, when the committee receives a communication or a complaint, we are not going there and there to, post on our website or even our social media platforms that we've received a communication against South Africa. It involves these, the facts of the case. So we just highlight that we have received a complaint from, a certain civil society organization against South Africa. And then I think when CSOs can actually come up with this application is where the communication has been declared admissible. Because when the communication or the complaint has been declared admissible, that is when it is actually posted on the website, and then anyone who wants to have access to that communication can actually check the website, and then you look at the facts or the summary of the alleged facts, and then if the CSO consent is interested in submitting or applying for amicus curiae, that can be made possible. And the other question relates to the issue of IDP. So from your compendiums, we actually have a provision on refugee children. Article 23 of the African Children's Charter actually talks about the issue of refugees. So I think the issue of IDPs also falls under this article. And then the last question on threats to the functions of the committee. I am not aware of any threats to the functions of the committee. And maybe just to say that since the committee all along was based in Addis, people are happy that the committee is now a bit of, on its own, the ACERWC can manage, its own affairs. So I do not know, I'm not aware of any threats to the work of the committee.
Can I ask a follow-up question in relation to that? How is the committee managing its relationship with each after it declared that its reservations were declared that its reservations against?
So there have been still anyway communications that have been submitted, against Egypt, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm not fully aware of how exactly the committee has been, engaged. Someone who is a committee member from Egypt. So, in as much as we say we don't want her to, because she might be an interested party or something, but she can also actually try to help in, trying to, fix or strengthen these relationships between the committee and Egypt. Thank you.
Is that communication confidential or?
Okay, I'll have to check. If
But on the pressures, I mean, I think when Lakula comes, she may speak, as you may know, but I'm sure she will talk. One of the reasons there was pressure on the African Commission was around sexual orientation, gender identity issues, which the Commission took on. So I'm wondering, does the committee, is there any discussion, has there been any issue around, sexual orientation, gender identity issues as far as children are concerned? And do you think that the issue of intersex is something that the committee would also find difficult? I think the committee may follow a tactic of avoidance, not reaction, and that's not the solution either, is it? So I wondered if there's a discussion at your order.
So yeah, I hope.
Sorry, if I can please do a small follow-up on that, just because when we were listing some of the admissibility criteria, one of them was compliance with the Constitutive Act, or basically, I think that's what it said, compliance with African Union standards or something to that effect. And I think the thing that Prof speaks about is how with observer status of an LGBT organization that was seen on from that, if hypothetically there was an issue with a child and it was to do with LGBT issues, is it even something that could end up being considered by the committee if it's seen as non-compliant with African law?
Okay, whatever I'm going to say, I'm not going to self-incriminate on that.
Same chapter rules apply.
Yes, that's true. So, actually, the issue of sexual orientation and the issue of intersex, children has actually shown up. If you are aware, we have a general comment on sexual exploitation, and I remember the consultant who was developing that general comment had actually put a provision on the issue of sexual orientation, and unfortunately, it was struck off. So I feel like, we need to do a lot, and it involves convincing, especially our committee members, because I would say, we have certain age groups, some are a bit old, some are a bit young, so the younger ones are, supporting the idea. They understand that, these children have rights, but then we also have these other ones who say, no, when the African Children's Charter was adopted, we took into account the situation of children in Africa, and then they'll think that this whole issue of sexual orientation, intersex persons, it's not in line with the values of Africa. But honestly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. But we actually have an organization with observer status, if I'm not mistaken, called the Center for Reproductive Rights. And I'm sure that part of their work also involves, issues of intersex children. So far, they have not made it specific, or in their submissions, they have not actually mentioned that issue. But I think maybe it would be ideal for them to do that, so they can see how the committee can actually address that issue.
Yes.
And as a CSO, I think it's also their duty to try to advocate and convince the African Children's Committee to also consider the issues of sexual orientation amongst children.
Where is the center based, the Center of Reproductive Rights?
So,
Okay.
but yes, there is an organization called the Center for Reproductive Rights that we have been working on as the committee.
Oh,
Yes.
Right, so thank you everyone. We have a refreshment break of 10 minutes, which is going to be at the restaurant outside. And Brian, can you maybe confirm if we have the food to now, or is it later? It's now. Yeah, we have a group photo.
No, we have the group photo after we get access.
Okay, so it would be.
Yeah, so now we just wait for 10 minutes.
Okay.
Refresh.
All right, yeah. Yes, yeah. And let us please try to respect time as much as possible. Thank
So
you.
what time exactly should we be
Can I
So you should be back by 12 o'clock. So you have a space for you to grab some.